My name is Monk Rowe, and we're at the IAJE in Manhattan filming for the Jazz Archive at Hamilton. I'm pleased to have James Chirillo with me tonight. It's fairly late, but for jazz musicians, it's fairly about the time you normally start work.
That's right, close to it.
You think of yourself as a guitarist and a composer.
True.
Yeah. What's it like trying to get your compositions on a recording or get people to play them?
Good question. You know, really, I am not a self-promoter, I guess. So, in that sense, I really can't answer the question. Usually, if something of mine has been recorded, it's because they asked me to write it for them in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's no guarantee. Even I've written plenty of things that I have not been played yet either, for that matter.
Right.
So, but like the clarinet piece I wrote for Ken Poplawski, that actually started from a draft of a melody that I wrote after a hotel gig, and I brought it in when I was studying with Johnny Carisi. And I thought I'd ask him about, how, if here's like a little, just say you dash something like this off, how would you start to develop this idea? So we talked about various ways, and then maybe about just a few weeks later, if that, he had a stroke which laid him basically semi-comatose for about 6 months, and then he passed away. So that material, which originally was a fast tempo kind of theme, just took a whole mournful turn. And so I ended up developing that and writing what turned out to be this middle movement of this piece for Ken Poplawski, Elegy for John Carisi. And that was musically, I was pretty happy with that. That was musically pretty successful as far as I was concerned, and Ken dug it. So I always had the idea, since that was originally a fast movement theme, why not expand that? And I'd played that for David Baker, and he said, "Man, you should apply for a NEA grant and finish writing that thing out." So I did, and I ended up getting it. So there you go. Ken had a recording project later on where he was able to, bring in a big band, and we used Lauren Schoenberg's band, and we got it done.
Boy, that's interesting how things little pieces of music can hang around for a while and they get changed by circumstances that you wouldn't conceive of, and it's worth saving things, I guess. And I don't know about you, but I find that when I write, sometimes I plagiarize myself.
Of course.
Over and over.
Of course. You liked it once. Why wouldn't you like it twice?
Yeah. I'll do a different arrangement of the same thing.
All the great guys did that.
Yeah. When you were at North Texas State, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but
sure.
I've got that on my mind. How much of, I don't know if you can give me a percentage, but how much what you learned there turned out to be useful in the real world of a gigging, working musician?
Well, in that, I was basically about one step removed from a blank slate when I went down there. I mean, I was a self-taught rock and roll guitar player. So I had just started to get into different jazz guitar players, when I went down there. Joe Pass, Grant Green, guys like that. Of course, Wes. But I hadn't even heard of Charlie Parker when I went down there. And I was, when was that? So I was 22.
No kidding.
Yeah. I was in the, King Crimson and those kind of guys.
Oh, King Crimson.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Robert Fripp, those guys. I mean, of course, in Hendrix and all those, Jimmy Page, you name it, but so when I went down there, man, anything that I got exposed to was great. And they had a great classical department too, let alone the jazz department.
What did you get accepted as, and what got you in there? Your compositions?
No, it's not like, I mean, back then, we're talking 75.
Mm-hmm.
It's a state university.
Okay.
I mean, it still is for that matter, but it wasn't, the whole financial outlay was much less. I remember even then, a semester was something between $800 and $1,200
Oh,
for a semester's worth of classes, a full load. And roughly the dorm was probably about the same. And after my first year there, I ended up getting like a guitar scholarship that Mundell Lowe was paying for. It was like $100 a semester, but if you win a scholarship like that, then it enables you to get in-state rates. So that basically, that $100 took care of the semester's tuition at the in-state rate.
wow.
So, made my dad happy. But
Yeah.
But still, I mean, that's the thing. So, I mean, I'm not really sure. I'd gone to, my grades weren't that great in high school because I was young and savage. But when I decided I was took a year off from high school before I got into college, and I took 2 years or so at Bellevue Community College, where I figured I would take all the, required kind of things like the math or the history or this and that. And of course it was, if I decide to use my brain, it's going to come out okay. So in high school I wasn't using my brain so much, but what the heck, I guess.
You were using
when you're at that
King
age,
Crimson.
oh Lord, no, it's, I'm not even going to go where I was just thinking. Okay, so stupidity knows no bounds, but that's beside the point. Suffice it to say, I got, like a, I don't know, 3.9 or whatever the heck it was when I was going to the community college. So I send those transcripts down there.
Right.
That's probably why they accepted me. Because musically I was, pretty savage.
Well, if you were learning some of the bands you mentioned, were you learning them by ear off the records?
Right.
Okay, well that's good training.
Oh yeah.
I don't care what kind of music.
Oh,
it is.
yeah.
That's because there's some difficult.
Oh yeah, there's some
playing
with
in
those
that
things.
music.
Absolutely, sure. And a couple of, buddies of mine, we'd always, you're always playing at that age. You're always playing with your friends and this and that. And we'd be turning each other on to different things that we were learning. And there was a piano player, a guy named Dave Lewis, who eventually moved out to the West Coast and was in a band called Ambrosia. I guess they were pretty happening there for a while.
They had a big hit.
I mean, he was a great piano player. I haven't heard him in a long time, but he was a great piano player. And he turned me on to Bela Bartok. He was learning some microcosmos at the time. So just you get exposed to this stuff. My first semester composition class at North Texas, my very first class, the teacher, God, I can picture him perfectly, and I can't remember his name now. I want to say George Johnson or something, but I'm not sure. Anyway, my very first class, he had all these articles, different topics, that everybody could pick one and then give a report on the article to the class for the following week. And the one that I got was Elliott article written in the Musical Quarterly about Elliott Carter's piano sonata. So that was the first time I heard Elliott Carter. So that was great. So just, man, anything and everything was great.
There's a whole world out there
Yeah.
that you weren't aware of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you played in the 1 o'clock band. That was
Yep.
pretty well known. And
Oh yeah, to answer your question, pardon me, I'm sort of
Yeah.
throwing a ball around, running with the ball. I mean, there are certain things nobody is going to learn at a college because you're not in a professional playing situation. I mean, if you show up to various jobs without, say if you're a horn player and you don't bring your mutes or something, and the band leaders, you bring the mutes, you don't feel like bringing them, whatever it is. Sometimes in college, guys don't feel like bringing mutes, schlepping them around all day or whatever, so they don't bring them to class, to the ensemble, whatever. That's reason enough for a guy not to call you back for the job next time, no matter how good you read.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, those kind of things you're not going to learn at the school. But in terms of we were sight reading music all the time. I mean, Leon Breeden, who was, the band director there when I was there, and he didn't actually start that program, but he really built it up. And he'd pull things for us to read, and he'd count them off, and then he'd leave. He'd go back in the office. He knew what the thing sounded like. He didn't need to see us read the thing, whatever. Or he'd look at whoever the lead alto player would. Here, you guys read through these 3 or 4 things. I got stuff I got to do in the office, and we'd just run them down. So we were constantly playing new music, and we're doing all sorts of new and different things, all different kind of styles. And so, you play a Thad Jones chart, or you play a Sammy Nestico chart, so there you're doing the Freddie Green thing, and I always had a good feeling for that. Nobody told me how to do that, but you listen to those Basie records, for instance.
Right.
And, you hear, just that feeling that he's putting in there. You may not even hear him that well, but when you start learning the different chords and the voicings, and as you're playing with the band, you just start to hone it down. You start realizing if you're playing all these notes, 4 and 5 note chords, it's just mushing things up. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't help. And you get down to maybe 3 notes. Okay, that's better, but then once in a while you start hitting the 1 note or maybe 2 notes, and that's it. You go, oh yeah, now okay. Now it feels right now. Now it feels that's how it's supposed to go.
What a great process of discovery, really, to figure that out. I was zooming around on the internet, actually, when looking for you, and I found this response you had written to someone about Freddie Green
website.
Article. Yeah,
the Freddie Green website, right?
I was amazed at the detail.
Oh yeah.
I forget that there's people that are crazy about absolutely everything.
Yeah, right.
But he's worth being crazy about,
Yeah, right.
It's but I had never heard. Bucky explained a little bit of
right.
The way he thinks about it made sense, but you're talking about using a little fingernail.
In this hand, right? Yeah, right hand fingernail. That's right. Well, Bucky will tell you that too if you really start asking him about different things.
Yeah. Oh, it's a right hand fingernail.
You get a little of that right hand index fingernail.
Oh, I see.
Part of that brushes across the strings, and
with
it gives
the
you
pick?
With the pick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not like you're really lit, but it's just, and I'd be playing, and I was playing for years, and you start doing it, and you say to yourself, okay, now this sounds right, this feels right, especially when we were talking about Mel Lewis a little earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And playing with him, it's pretty easy to get it to feel right, Lord. Yeah. But I'm playing with him, and you start hitting the guitar in a certain way, and you can, okay, right, this is how it's supposed to go. And I'd been playing for years, doing that kind of rhythm playing and all this, and this fingernail always would get worn down, and after a while, I'd notice one side's totally lopsided, and this is all a weird, twisted edge to it and all that stuff. I could tell, I was hitting the thing, all right. But I never made the connection that's what's making what's making that sound. And a student came over who had studied with Bucky, and we're talking about playing this. He says, "Oh yeah, Bucky says you got to get a little fingernail in there." I thought, "Oh yeah, of course. Well, that's why I'm always wearing the thing down, because that's what I'm doing."
Yeah.
Sometimes it's obvious.
You have to take a certain pride in providing that correctly, that Freddie Green thing. I mean, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but I don't think all guitar players can be content with doing that.
Yeah, well, most don't. It's a very limiting role. If that's all I did, I'd probably go nuts too. Freddie Green was pretty special. I mean, you're giving 100% all the time. You never solo. And why do you think Freddie Green never soloed? Because the strings were up so so high.
Uh-huh.
You know, basically, if those strings are up really high, and he had really heavy gauge, thick, heavy strings, with the bridge set so that they're very high above the fingerboards, you get really high tension. So basically, the amount of strength it takes just to hold a string down is the equivalent, say, I always say, well, it's basically you're doing the equivalent of crushing rocks all day with your left hand.
He must have had a strong left hand, I guess.
I don't think you'd want to shake lefties with him. And so you can't, if you're playing some light bebop line, you cannot do that on a guitar where you're jumping on every note. You got to jump in the hole with both feet just to get that thing down.
Oh.
Say.
Did you ever hear those anecdotes about, for a while he had an amp and the guys in the band sabotaged it?
Yeah, right.
Because when he stopped playing rhythm, the band fell apart.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Well, were your parents, like, supportive of your... I assume when you went to North Texas State, you were thinking, well, I'm going to a career in music.
Yeah, right.
Were they okay with that?
Yeah. I mean, my grandfather initially was a professional trumpet player. My dad's dad. He played the Panamanian exposition of, what was that, 1908 or something like that. Then he met my grandmother, and she said, look, if you want to marry me, you're going to have to get a job. A real job, typical. And so he was in New York City sanitation department garbage man.
Oh, gee.
But then after a while, you know, that was back in the days when the city had, every department had their own band. Fire department had their own band, police department, all the departments had their bands. The sanitation department had their own band. They even had their own conductor, an Italian conductor. Most of the guys in the band were Italian guys. All this is just to say this, that they had like some serious training. And there was like plenty of time where he wasn't even like lifting garbage cans anymore. He was just out there playing different events with that band. 39 World's Fair in New York, he was playing the World's Fair every day. That Queen Mary would come in, he'd go down and play for whoever was coming in on the Queen Mary. So there was a little respect for that already in the family. My father was a career Navy officer, and they bought me my first guitar. You know, my brother had an old Sears and Roebuck acoustic archtop, and I just ended up beating on it more than him. And when I was 13, my parents bought me a little Vox electric guitar. So you got to say they were supportive, but I was making nothing but some pretty savage noise on it back in those days. And when I was being particularly, shall we say, difficult, to put it politely, my old man he says, what are you going to do with yourself? You ain't going to do that. I said, I'm planning on doing this with my life. He says, basically, you got to be kidding me, because I was just making a lot of noise. But then, as you saw, I got more and more serious. And of course, when I was going to Bellevue Community College and bringing home the grades, and I was taking other music classes there too. Then he went to North Texas, and I was same thing. I was 3.9 or whatever the heck it was down there too. So then they knew I was getting serious, and I ended up in that 1 o'clock, and we toured. We did a State Department tour in 1976 of Russia, of the Soviet Union. So we went all over. My first time overseas. A week in Portugal. That was great. And I was totally ignorant. I had no idea, But it was, I had a ball. And so they, I got that scholarship as I mentioned before. So they were supportive, absolutely.
Is there was there a big break for you when you look back on post-college then? Was there a relationship with a particular musician or something that happened that you felt really opened things up?
There's no one
guy
I can single out. I can name for different aspects of being able to stick around and stay alive.
Yeah.
As a musician, there's plenty of guys I could name. I went to North Texas in spring, January, whatever, at that spring semester, but it starts in January of 1975. And I didn't, try out for a jazz band. They'd already pretty much had all that stuff settled from, September, whatever, the previous. So, but in the summer, for the summer bands, and I just stayed down and went to school in the summer. For the summer bands, Leon directed it also, but they only had like one band. It was just from whoever was around. So whoever wanted to apply for, you could end up playing in this band and whatever. So it's not like you had to really audition for it or nothing. And that first summer, I played in that band, and that's when a great guitar player teacher, a guy named Jack Peterson, decided to start teaching at college again. He's the guy that actually started the guitar program at Berkeley. Back in, I think, the late 50s. He really got that going. And he's an old Texas boy, so he ended up moving back down to Dallas and got involved in the whole commercial jingle scene. There was a lot of jingle recording back then in those days, and he was doing everything because he plays great, and of course he could arrange like nobody's business and everything. So then he got tired of doing that, and he decided to get back into teaching. So that was that first. So he heard me back then, and so I learned a lot from him, and and playing at North Texas when they had a band in Dallas at the Fairmont Hotel that actually was it first started I forget exactly how they decided on picking Jerry Gray, but the guy whoever made that decision, he loved Glenn Miller and Jerry Gray particularly, and he got Jerry Gray to be the band leader at the Fairmont Hotel in Dallas back then, in the early 70s. So he had a great band. Now I think he had just stopped leading that band right about when I got down there, or maybe even had passed away at that time. I'm not really quite sure when Jerry Gray passed away, but so I never met him personally, but he's the guy that got that band going. It was a great band. So they'd bring acts in, and they didn't have a steady guitar player. So when they had a show come in, an act come in that they needed a guitar player, they'd usually try the North Texas guys or whatever, because they could read, and okay. So I started doing some of those. Joey Heatherton came down, and she brought with her musical director, drummer, a guy named Jerry Fisher. Crazy Jerry Fisher. And good guy though, good drummer. And Jerry Bruno was the bass player. She brought him down. And so Jerry Bruno and I were sitting next to each other for a couple of weeks doing the show, and we just sort of hit it off. He was just, he played with Frank Sinatra, he played with everybody, this guy. He's still around, he's in Fort Lee. So we had a great time. He said, man, if you ever come to New York, give me a call. So I ended up saving my money. I ended up joining the Army band. I was in the band at West Point for 3 years, saved money, moved to New York, 1982. I called up Jerry Bruno. He said, come down to the Union. That's on Wednesday. You meet whatever, and I'll introduce you to everybody I know. He introduced me to everybody he knew. And a year later, just about to the day, I realized I had $50 left in the bank. And no money. And a guy that Jerry Bruno had introduced me to called me and offered me a 3-day-a-week job at the Grand Hyatt Hotel. And I was there for 5 years.
Wow. Talk about timing.
Timing, oh yeah. Yeah, that's what you get if you don't look at the checkbook. I knew I was getting close. So anyway, it's not like I always had loads of money, but I never really worried about it either.
Well, but your wife is also a musician.
Right.
So you guys you're a pair of musicians, which can be. But
it's really if you just keep doing it long enough, then eventually you meet you know enough people and enough things, you always end up getting enough to make ends meet. That's never. I've never really worried about it ever.
Yeah. What was it like studying with Tiny Grimes?
Well, there's another one. Now, I really got a concept of sound from him, too. Tiny, I mean, he was very, very down to earth, very straight ahead. And, of course, he was only maybe around for a few more years after when I first met him and started studying with him. But, like Tiny now, a couple of quick anecdotes about Tiny. When I first met him, I just saw like a poster in the neighborhood. I was living uptown, and about him playing at the Jazz Cultural Center, which was a place that presented concerts, but also was used in an educational sense by Barry Harris. Mm-hmm. He started that baby up. So I saw this. Okay, Tiny Grimes at that boom. So I went down there, and I got down there, I don't know, a little bit early, whatever. And he's just, Tiny's just sitting in a chair, warming up on that 4-string guitar, and I just walk over and introduce myself and start talking. And I'd picked up a couple of his records, some groovy 4s. Anyway, and so, guitar player figures, okay. He says, here, he hands me his guitar, he says, here, play me something. So, okay. So I figured 4-string guitar, it's, that kind of chordal style maybe. I thought, well, Jack Peterson had taught me Dick McDonough's guitar solo from 1934 on Honeysuckle Rose. Oh. Great little acoustic, rhythm-based chordal style of that tune. Dick McDonough was great if you never heard him before. So I played that. So Tiny sort of dug that. So, we started getting up there. And the lesson, I forget how much he charged me, but it wasn't much. But part of the lesson was, it was, when I show up, you got to have a New York Post and either 1 or 2 quarts of Ballantine ale, depending on how he was feeling that day. Mm. That was Tiny. But he told me he never practiced so much as ever in his life as when he was playing with the Art Tatum Trio.
I can imagine.
He said he had only been playing the guitar for 3 years when he ended up in that trio. Slam had perfect pitch, so if Art just sort of, went that away, he'd go, but, neither of those guys would be telling him nothing. But there was one good one where Bill Finnegan told me this one. That trio was playing somewhere, some joint. Art Tatum's doing Lover, and of course he's totally tearing it up, and it's it's just tearing it up, for chorus after chorus, totally tearing it up. So he's rolling around on this last chorus, and he sort of, up at Tiny, okay, you got it. Tiny yells back, I don't want it.
Thanks.
That's Tiny Grimes.
Well, that's hard to... I used to play with a guitar player like that who played so much for so many choruses. Then he says, "You got it." You already said all.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
I have nothing to add.
I know. Yeah, you got to save some for the next guy. That's true.
Bill Finnegan, God, he got an interesting reputation from all his work. It was further composition studies with him.
Oh yeah, orchestration and arranging. Yeah, he studied with Stefan Volpe too. Mm-hmm. And he said, Volpe, German, an emigre German, basically serialist composer, extremely intense. His music is sort of like makes Arnold Schoenberg look like T for Two. It's it's really intense stuff, but very organized. But as I mentioned, Carisi studied with this guy, and Eddie Sauter studied with him too. But Bill said, he had a little downstairs room. I don't know if that was his apartment or just room. But you got to go down some stairs to get to where his room was. Like a little basement kind of thing. And just to make a point, like Bill said, he'd bring something in, and maybe he'd, on the second 8, just repeat something or whatever, second 8 phrase. He'd repeat it the same way he did it the first time. And he said Volpe would say, why do you want to do it the same way? We just heard it that way once already. And then he said he'd jump up from the piano and he'd run around and go up like the stairs a few steps and then go say his name, Stefan Volpe, so he'd Americanize Steve. He'd say, it's like you saying, hi, Steve. And he'd walk around and go around to the other side of the piano and go, hi, Steve. You're still just saying hi, Steve. Good way to get the point across.
I guess so.
Yeah, Finnegan. I mean, he's... have you heard that Warren Vichet string ensemble?
I
The
haven't
Scottish
heard that
string
yet.
ensemble?
They got him to do some...
Bill wrote 3 arrangements on that. And when you listen to those, aside from the fact that they sound just gorgeous, and they just set those tunes up perfectly for Warren, and they just sound great, just think that he wrote those sitting on the sofa because it was hurting his back. He's been having like some back problems or whatever. The point is, hurt his back to sit at the piano, so he wrote those all in his head sitting
Can
on
you
the
do
sofa.
that?
No, not like that.
No, me neither.
If I'd learned right probably when I was young, I could have developed that capacity, but I didn't really learn. I learned a lot more playing wise and getting a sound. I mean, I can hear really good. My relative pitch is about as good as you're going to ever need it to get. I can't do not write something like that. I mean, if I look at a score, I got to really think to start to hear different lines and to make sure I'm really hearing the harmony. I got to really concentrate on that.
Do you think being a composer and having studied composing affects the way you improvise?
Of course. Yeah. Most really great composers could play something. And usually pretty darn good. Beethoven, is when he played his first piano concerto, I forget for what prince he was writing it for, but whatever. But he showed up and the piano was tuned. The piano concerto was written in C, but the piano was tuned and it had settled like a half step low. So he played his part in D flat that day. That's a killer.
Scary.
Yeah. So I guess the point is when you're writing something, the challenge is, especially if it's like how most jazz players. Let me back up a bit. If you're playing a standard tune, a tune that the audience already knows, that your listening audience already is familiar with, be it by Irving Berlin or who knows, but they already know the melody. Now, you're going to do it in a way, the challenge is, hopefully, that it's going to sound fresh to them. So, and that doesn't mean like totally rewrite the tune. Maybe you want to throw in a little different harmony or something, okay. But then even when you're playing, if you got that same old tune, and you're with a group or whatever, maybe you have one horn, or maybe it's just guitar trio, whatever. How many courses of that you're going to play where it's going to be exactly the same? You're not going to change key on every chorus. You're not going to totally rewrite the harmony on every chorus. I mean, chances are, unless you have a luxury of a working trio, the same guys you're really used to doing, they're not, you're going to have the basic chord changes already. Bass player's going to know the tune. You're going to play the tune. That's it. It's not like you're going to rehearse it or anything. So, how do you make those same notes sound fresh? And it's the same thing with writing a great arrangement, or if you write a piece, you write a tune, whatever it is, your ideas. How do you make them sound fresh, but still logically coherent, part of the whole? And so, of course, studying all. Brahms, Brahms, Gabrielli, all those guys, Palestrina. Now this is something that Finnegan told me. Now dig this. Eddie Sauter wrote for Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman hired Bartok. They played that Contrasts. He wrote that Contrasts for Joseph Szigeti, himself to play on the piano, and Benny Goodman on a clarinet, right? And Bartok came, and Szigeti, maybe he was already here, whatever. He came to New York, and they recorded that at RCA. 1930, whatever it was. Maybe it was early 40s, I forget. But, okay. So, Eddie Sauter, I mean, he knew Benny. I mean, he knew, he made it a point of, I'm going to get down to RCA that day.
Yeah.
And so Bill Finnegan told me this. At a quiet moment in the action, Eddie Sauter went up to Bela Bartok and introduced himself, and Maestro Bartok, I'm a writer myself, and and I looked at what you've done, and what advice do you have for a young writer? And he said the only thing Bartok would tell him was, study Palestrina. Now dig that.
Wow.
And then now you get into Bartok a little more, as far as you start really checking in some of the things he's done besides just like the really main pieces, like Concerto for Orchestra or something like that. And you find that he's written 27 2- or 3-part vocal pieces for vocal chorus, for either children's or women's chorus. 27 small pieces. And these are a direct result of him studying a book on 16th century counterpoint in the style by a Danish musicologist named Jeppesen that Bartok read on dissonance in the style of Palestrina. Kodai said he was always bugging Bartok to write. Why don't you write some vocal music already? Come on, write some. Come on, we need some vocal. Write some. He ended up writing that, reading that book and getting into Palestrina's style like that, and he wrote those 27 pieces. And to hear how he works and overlaps, those motives and everything with some of those Hungarian scales, some of those Hungarian modes, and his sense of, his rhythm and everything. It's, oh man, those things are beautiful. You ever get a chance to hear those, check those out.
Tell me about Benny Goodman. How did that come about?
Well, Lawrence Schoenberg was working for Benny at that time. He was sort of like his secretary, and fielding phone calls, doing things, whatever.
Yeah.
But Lauren had his own. He had his own band, and from what I gather, when Benny was approached by PBS to do a PBS special, Let's Dance, he just asked Lauren to put the band together, get a band together. And, Lauren always had an interest, his primary interest, especially at that time, whenever he would get his band together, would be to play Fletcher Henderson arrangements and, that style kind of things. So I guess Benny had heard that band and says, get that band together. I was pretty new in town. Lauren knew me, though. And I gather for the first rehearsal, Howard Alden did the first rehearsal. And he was playing in that band at that time. And but he couldn't make the next one. And so Lauren called me, and I did it. And I don't know if, for whatever reason, either Benny said, boom, or Lauren said, I want to use this guy. Who knows? But I ended up doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Yeah, Benny. Everybody hears those stories about him. He could be a real gentleman, and then he could be diabolically nasty, to musicians. Like I was telling you, we would rehearse at the Wellington Hotel.
Yeah.
Sometimes he'd take the whole band out for like a great lunch, dinner, whatever, at Spring for the whole thing. At a Top Dollar Upper East Side joint. And at one of those rehearsals at the Wellington, Jack Lesberg was playing bass. First time I ever got a chance to play with Jack. Play the first hour or whatever it was of the rehearsal. Benny, on the break, says, "What do you think of the bass player?" I said, boy, man, he's got a great beat. I said, he plays right in tune. Man, I'm having a ball. I remember that. That's almost verbatim, exactly what I said. And he says, oh, okay. He goes right from me, walks over to Jack Lesberg, puts his hand on his shoulder, says, Jack, I don't think it's going to work out. Sends him home. That's when Murray Wall started playing with the band.
My.
He got Murray Wall.
Gee. Jack Lesberg?
Jack Lesberg. And he fired me after a while, so what the heck?
He fired you too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Well,
Good company.
Do you... Well, yeah, you've he's not the only one. You're not
Yeah,
the
right,
only
I'm not
one,
the only
right?
one.
But do you know what you did to make him do that?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Probably, if he feels you've got any kind of musical weakness at all, then it's like he just sort of goes for the jugular, I guess.
Well,
You got me. And I wasn't maybe as secure or as settled. I was a lot younger, so.
huh. Wow. Well, it was nice you had that experience anyway.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, whenever we would play, I mean, he was what, 78 or something. He by himself could take that band up to another level, easy. When he felt like playing, he could just ratchet it up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So.
Well, I have a little drop the needle test for you.
Oh man.
It's going to be easy.
Okay.
Trust
yeah. Right.
me.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Well, duh.
See, now that's funny because I forget who was here earlier today, and I played something and it was them, and they didn't recognize themselves.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but
Tony.
what? So, a high school student says, "So, what do you
Tony.
think about when you improvise?" Can you answer that?
Well, I'm thinking about that melody, and I'm hearing the harmony at the same time. And other than
the
that,
original melody.
yeah, absolutely,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Well, otherwise, why bother playing that tune? Why you might as well improvise. Otherwise, if all you're thinking about is like maybe the chords or something like that, then all you're going to do is the same patterns on cheek to cheek that you would on Lotus Blossom.
Mm.
So the whole thing for me is, and again, it's on a composition, compositionally speaking too. If you're going to improvise on a tune, your primary focus should be you're coming up with variations of that melody. That's the idea.
That's the idea.
That's what I always thought.
Well, me too. But
So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm improvising. I'm just playing that. All I'm doing is playing the tune.
okay, so does that concept work if you're playing? Oh gosh, like So What? Or if you're playing a song that's modal and it's got 2 chord changes, and the first,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Well, I haven't probably played that tune since I was at North Texas State.
Really?
I'm sure. And only because, not that it can be a valid, musical experience, but I don't know. For me, my ear gets fatigued with the same tonality after a while. And if it's that same minor mode, even though it goes up a half step, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I heard that trick once already. Go down a half step maybe, but no, you still always go up. Okay, whatever. I'm just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
So I just don't find it as interesting to play. Back then, I couldn't really even differentiate between different kind of minor modes. So that Dorian mode kind of sound, that was one I could relate to with my rock kind of experience. It was the minor mode, but you still had the dominant seventh and all that kind of stuff, and it worked really good. So, so I could hear it. So that made it good for me back then. But even now, if I played that tune now, I'd still try to work off that idea.
Or the bass line.
Right, well, that's what it is. Yeah.
That's really the melody.
That's what it
almost.
is. That's the melody. Right.
Yeah,
sure. Absolutely. That's, I mean, for me, that kind of a tune is a lot harder to play than Cheek to Cheek and really make it interesting because, you're just doing other. You got this. It's a list to work with.
Yeah,
less
to work with. I don't know. It's interesting that jazz went that way somehow. Maybe the musicians were reacting to the intensity of like giant steps and those all those chords coming so fast. It says, well, that's about as far as we can go with that.
Yeah, right. Well, that was really an exercise. Giant steps was. That's a hard tune too.
Yeah.
But I mean that's just an exercise, and even that. In and of itself, because it just keeps on going around like that. That gets old to me too after a while. I would rather listen to Cheek, because that to me has a sense of logic. That states a premise, it develops it, and puts the capper on it. To me, I find that a more interesting journey. Giant steps. I mean, you hear. Somebody that knows what they're doing with it. I mean, it's impressive. You can't argue the point, but. It just keeps on sort of going. It's for that same reason. It's why I don't always dig a lot. Some of Wagner is great, but some of his other stuff, it's the same thing. It never seems to really get to the point. It just keeps on sort of going. No, it doesn't really resolve it. No, we're doing this again, but now we're in another place to do it. And it just sort of continually goes and never really finally goes. Da-da, whatever. It never really gets there. So Giant Step sort of strikes me the same way.
Yeah. You make your living playing usually small combo gigs and solo things.
A lot of different things.
A lot of different things. Like you'll play a wedding if you get a call to play a wedding.
Sure.
You'll play like a Kenny DeVerne type gig on a jazz concert.
Yeah. Yep.
And anything that comes along.
Banjo, a lot of banjo jobs.
Right.
Absolutely, a lot of traditional. Because especially banjo, it's playing rhythm. It's playing time down and laying time down. And a good rhythm player, and that could be a bass player or whatever, you should be able to hold the fort whether anybody else is playing or not. So I do a lot of jobs where there is not a drummer. Duo gigs, even when there's no bass player, because I can hold the fort. I don't need to have a drummer doing this. But when you got a guy like Tony, I mean, that's like, oh man, then it's you just go along for the ride. That just is so easy when it's like that. But you get the idea. So I mean, a lot of different things. Sometimes. Traditional Dixie kind of things, like school programs for elementary school kids during the day. Concerts with Jazz at Lincoln Center. We did the Rhapsody in Blue, and with Marcus Roberts, and we started out with Freddie Green's original orchestration, which is banjo, but then he opens it up in the middle and changing it around, so you're reading the original banjo part.
Wow.
And then on that concert, we did that. We did some other Gershwin tunes that were arranged by Nelson Riddle for Ella and Frank Sinatra. So then I'm playing acoustic rhythm guitar, and that was great. That was great to be in the middle of that. They had the American Composers Orchestra, so we had the full complement of strings and extra winds and everything. And then we also did a modern piece by a guy named Derek Bermel, which was like electric guitar with distortion stuff and you name it. So I went and read. I mean, I'd measured numbers, bars, and all times, whatever. So,
like King Crimson, right?
All in the same concert from 1920, whatever it was, on the banjo to this stuff. Yeah, right.
That's
all the things. So, there aren't many guys that can do that. So that's good.
That's good.
Good for me.
We're having a discussion with a few people today about traditional jazz, and they feel it's not well represented in the jazz education scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out why. Why is the music of Charlie Parker and John Coltrane given more artistic weight than the music of Gene Goldcat or
Bix
or Bix or that kind of thing,
or Duke for that matter.
Yeah,
of course Duke is. They've been his image has been changing quite a bit. I would say over the last 20 years or something, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Even in the jazz education thing.
Yeah.
Well, now we enter the realm of conjecture.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know? Am I copping a plea? I don't know. I mean, I like I say, I can conjecture. I mean, I think the bottom line is simply somebody is going to teach what they feel most comfortable with and what they most like. So the generation of educators that are out there in the jazz college scene or jazz high school, whatever, if those are the guys that they really, maybe they listen to Duke, maybe they listen to Bix and, the older guys and whatever. Louis Armstrong, for as far as I'm concerned, pardon me, if it doesn't come out of Louis Armstrong, it doesn't swing. Swing, you know what I mean? That for me, that's what that is. And jazz now is encompasses so many more influences, than just a straight swing kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it can arguably cerebral, whatever. You get the idea. It encompasses a lot of other things. So whatever's going to get taught is going to get taught. It's going to reflect the guys who are teaching it, and if that's what they're into, that's what's going to be the focus.
Right. Sometimes I think when I listen to it, it's so happy. Most of it, it's so joyous.
Oh, the traditional stuff.
The traditional stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's happy music.
Sometimes I think maybe that works against it as far as being considered weighty and artistic and worth dissecting,
That's very true.
Because Lord knows they've dissected, almost every other kind of jazz.
That's right. I know. That's right. It's almost as if it's an accepted corollary that if it's happy stuff, then it can't be that serious.
Mm-hmm.
It's not serious.
Yeah.
And again, as far as I'm concerned, if Louis Armstrong did it, that's serious enough for me.
Uh-huh.
If Duke Ellington did it, that's serious enough for me.
Yeah.
If Red Allen did it, that's serious. And Jack Teagarden, and the list just goes on and on and on. And those guys, those were the guys that defined everything that we're doing today. Those were the guys who, John Coltrane and Cannonball, Johnny Hodges. Who was Cannonball listening to? Willie Smith, Benny Carter, Johnny Hodges. Who was he listening to?
I thought of that yesterday when I had this recording of him doing Stars Fell on Alabama.
Right. Yep.
But the blue, just like Johnny Hodges,
Well, you know where he got that from. Yeah, right, of course.
Jeez.
That's right, all those guys.
Yike.
Yeah, so, I've been really lucky. I got to New York right when some of those guys were still around. So I got to play with Eddie Durham, Eddie Bearfield.
Really? Wow.
Bearfield. You got an idea. I heard Zoot Zoot Sims came down and did Spoleto. When they had a Spoleto festival in Charleston, South Carolina, in the late 70s for a couple of years. And they brought the North Texas band out there. So we'd back up whoever, they would bring in. And they never would bring in guitar players. So the whole North Texas rhythm section had to take a break. But I got to play with...
All right.
I mean, we did a couple of nights with Ella. So I got to play with Tommy Flanagan and Keeter Betts. Keeter, who I played with plenty over the last few years, till he just passed away like a year ago. All these guys. So they had the Spoleto. What was I starting to talk about? We were talking about
Zoot Sims.
Zoot. Yeah, Zoot came and did a concert with us. Now I'd sort of heard the name, but I'm an older swing guy, and I didn't know nothing. I really didn't know what this guy had done. I heard him in the Woody Herman band, some recordings or something like that, but I basically totally ignorant. But all I knew was, and he was such a slight, quiet character. Physically slight. He wasn't like a big strapping guy, but he seemed very low key, very quiet. Not like I really talked to him or hung out or got to know him or anything. But when he started to play that saxophone, it really struck me. That's how a saxophone's supposed to sound. That's, and again, he didn't need any rhythm section playing to show him where the time was. That's how it's supposed to go. That's what it's supposed to sound like. So, you hear a few guys like that. That's it, man.
I got to play a few gigs with Claude Fiddler Williams.
Oh yeah,
you did quite a bit with him.
Yeah, I worked with Claude.
That was fun.
Yeah, Claude. See, now Claude was another one.
Yeah.
He said he used to play with Charlie Parker when he was still learning how to play the saxophone.
That's wild.
In Kansas City.
So wild to think of that.
Claude. He was a real little guy.
Yeah.
Very quiet, and since he was so old. You think he died? He was 94 or something like that, right? Something like that. So people were always, he's very quiet, and it's just sort of like how he was. He almost wouldn't register if somebody was talking to him that he didn't really know. He'd be taking it all in, but he wouldn't be registering anything. So a lot of people didn't really know exactly maybe how on top of it maybe mentally he was, but believe me, he was all there. And there would always be some violin players that would show up, and they'd always ask to sit in. Okay, yeah, man, we'll play a couple numbers, and he'd take it easy on the first couple of numbers.
Yeah.
And then I'll bring you up there. So then he'd take it easy on the first couple of numbers, and then they'd come up and he'd pick some tune like. I remember this one person got up there, and he said, "How about Over the Rainbow?" Which is a little tricky tune. It's got some funny spots to it, If you don't really know that tune, that can throw you a couple of curveballs. So the person goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds, everybody knows Over the Rainbow." So you let him take the first chorus. Actually, it was a she in this case. Let her take the first chorus, and she'd okay, but you could tell it wasn't. She didn't really know the ins and outs of that. And then, of course, he just tore it up. And then the next tune, maybe he'd do something like with a bit of a tempo, and then he'd just get, oh man. He would assume that stance. I don't know if you played with him, right? So he'd get that stance where he'd just be rocking on both, he'd be standing up, but he'd be rocking on his feet like that at whatever the tempo was, and he just totally destroyed these guys. And anytime anybody got up there to sit in, I never saw him fail to totally annihilate these guys. But always very low key, and next thing they knew, they were like, oh man, digging themselves a hole. It was so funny.
He called we were playing in it was an AABA song, and at some point he said channel.
Right, yeah.
That's the first time I'd heard that, I'd love that.
Yeah, right, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah, okay. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it's an old school thing.
Yeah, to think you're playing with a guy who was Basie's first guitar player, you know. That's
Before Freddie Green.
Before Freddie Green.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Gee. Huh. What's the outlook for your working scene? Do you think it'll change in the near future? You've pretty much established yourself.
Well, I mean, I'm established as anybody's going to get, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not, primarily known as a soloist. It seems like I'm always the behind-the-scenes guy, helping make somebody else, look good.
Yeah.
With nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not a self-promoter, so that's got something to do with it too. But in terms of, a lot of those jazz parties, those are mostly all sponsored and attended by, the generation ahead of you and me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't see how that whole work scene cannot change, because they're not really getting replaced by anybody.
Right.
So it probably, I don't know exactly what direction, my career personally is going to take. Maybe I'll have to start self-promoting more, start doing more things on my own as a leader,
Yeah.
I'm probably way overdue, but yeah, there will probably be fewer jazz parties per se. There will probably be more of an emphasis. I started doing some education things for jazz at Lincoln Center. Last summer I did their Band Directors Academy, and I did the Essentially Ellington, which required giving like classes and workshops and things, and so. And I'm pretty good at that too. So, chances are, maybe not necessarily only like through them or whatever, but I'll probably do some more things on the educational level. I can't see myself being a college teacher per se.
Do you get any studio?
But that's just because I can't see it.
Any studio work? I mean,
I'm
like commercial.
Sure. No, commercial.
No.
Nah. I did a couple of Woody Allen film soundtracks.
Yeah.
Dick Hyman, he was an MD.
Right.
And on one, he needed like acoustic rhythm and banjo, and like full studio orchestra that kind of rhythm playing. So, I'm good at that. So I did that. And I subbed for Bucky playing rhythm on one track of that Sweet and Low Down.
Oh.
But it's not like most of the jingles you hear, or commercial music. It's all rock-oriented stuff.
Yeah.
Most of it.
Yeah.
And I never got into that in the first place, even when it wasn't rock. So no reason for them to call me now. That's for sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I'll probably do other like recordings for smaller jazz labels and those kind of things. But
I enjoyed your release on Nagel Hire.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. Your 2 tunes on there of yours that I liked.
Thanks.
Do you have trouble finding titles for your work?
Well, the solution to that is just don't write many things. You don't have to come up with that many titles. Sorry. I mean, cause not really.
Okay.
No, but I mean, partly it probably is because I don't write that much. I mean, it's.
Okay.
I mean, when I write, I'm slow. Whatever. It's but when it comes out, it's good.
Yeah.
Whatever comes out is good. But I mean, Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn, those guys were cranking it out, and they came up with all. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
It still is amazing to me.
Yeah.
The titles they would come up with.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks.
I
Me
enjoyed
too.
dinner. Thanks for taking us to that Ralph's.
Ah.
That was nice.
I just turned you on to Ralph's. You're the one that took me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope to see you in the near future, and best of luck.
All right. Thanks, Mark. All right.